The ship hung in the darkness beyond the moon where no human telescope could find it, and inside that ship, Assessor Prime Velethkan studied the blue world spinning slowly in the void. He had done this work for 300 years, and his species had done it for 12,000 before him. And in all that time, the formula had never failed them. Find a primitive world, measure its power, send the fleet. Add another species to the hegemony's collection of servants and slaves. It was simple mathematics, and Velethkan was very good. At mathematics, his instruments swept across the planet called Earth, and the data flowed into his screens like water filling a cup. Population: 8 billion divided into nearly 200 separate nations that could not stop fighting each other. Technology: primitive chemical rockets that had barely touched their own moon. Not to what weapons they mostly pointed at each other. Communication systems that leaked signals into space like a child screaming in a library. Military capacity, fragmented across dozens of competing powers with no unified command structure and no planetary defense network. Energy production, still burning dead plants and dinosaurs. Like cavemen huddled around a fire, Velethkan felt almost embarrassed for them as he compiled his report. He had assessed over 90 worlds in his career, and this one ranked among the weakest he had ever seen. A species so busy fighting itself that it had never looked up at the stars and wondered what might be looking back. His clawed fingers moved across the console, and he assigned a classification that would seal their fate. Tier 7, Pre-Spacefaring. Civilization Recommended Subjugation Force. 1 standard pacification fleet. He transmitted the report to Hegemony Command and settled back to wait, knowing that within a few cycles the fleet would arrive and this little blue world would learn its place in the galactic order. What Velethkan did not know and could not have known was that his instruments were missing something they could measure. Factories and weapons and population centers, but they had no sensor designed to detect stubbornness. They could count nuclear warheads and calculate industrial output, but they had no algorithm that could quantify spite. They could analyze military formations and defense systems, but they had no way to understand a species that had clawed its way to dominance on its own world, not through strength or speed or natural weapons, but through a simple refusal to ever give up. Velethkan looked at humanity and saw weakness because humanity was divided and primitive and small. He did not see what made them dangerous. He did not see that every nation on Earth had been forged in war, that every human alive carried the genetic legacy of ancestors who had survived ice ages and plagues and famines and predators, that the history of humanity was written in blood and fire and the bones of everything that ever tried to destroy them. He did not understand that a species which had spent its entire existence fighting for survival would not simply bow when a greater threat appeared. They would do what they had always done. They would fight, and they would make their enemies pay for every single inch. Far across the galaxy, the hegemony received the assessment report, and Admiral Kethvaros began assembling his fleet. 47 ships crewed by warriors who had conquered 100 worlds. And he looked at the data on Earth and felt nothing but contempt. Another primitive species. Another easy victory. Another world added to the hegemony's endless empire. He did not bother to study the reports in detail because there was nothing in them that concerned him. Tier 7 civilizations always surrendered once they saw the fleet. Once they understood how small they were against the vastness of the hegemony's power. Kethvaros had never lost a battle against a Tier 7 world, and he did not expect to lose this one. He gathered his captains and briefed them on the operation. And they laughed together at the primitives who still burned fossil fuels and could not even agree on a single planetary government. The fleet would translate into the system and broadcast the standard subjugation terms, and the humans would kneel. And that would be the end of it. Perhaps a few would resist, and they would be crushed as an example to the others. It was all very routine. Meanwhile, on Earth, humanity went about its business with no idea that it had been measured and found wanting. No idea that somewhere in the darkness between stars, a fleet was being assembled to claim them as property. Children went to school, and workers went to their jobs, and politicians argued about borders and resources and all the small concerns that seemed so important when you did not know that something was coming. But even in their ignorance, the humans were preparing without knowing it. Every war they had ever fought had taught them to be ready. Every conflict had refined their weapons and their tactics and their ability to coordinate across vast distances in moments. Every generation had passed down the knowledge that the universe was dangerous and that survival belonged only to those who were willing to fight for it. The hegemony had conquered 1,000 species, but they had never encountered anything like humanity, because humanity was not a single civilization. Humanity was 8 billion survivors. Each one descended from an unbroken line of ancestors who had refused to die when the universe demanded it. The Lothcon had measured their factories and their weapons and their divided governments, and he had seen weakness. He should have measured their history. He should have measured the graves of everything that had ever tried to wipe them out. He should have measured the look in a human's eyes when you told them something was impossible. But he did not measure any of those things because the hegemony's instruments were not designed to detect the one quality that made humans different from every other species they had ever conquered. Hope mixed with rage, faith wrapped in fury, the absolute unshakable belief that no matter how dark things became, no matter how powerful the enemy, no matter how impossible the odds, there was always a way to win if you were willing to pay the price. The fleet was coming, and humanity did not know it yet. But when they found out, they would not kneel. They would rise, and the hegemony would learn that some species cannot be measured with instruments and algorithms and cold mathematical formulas. Some species have to be understood, and by the time you understand them, it is already too late. The sky split open on a Tuesday afternoon, and 47 ships poured through the wound in space like blood from a cut. Admiral Kethvaros stood on the bridge of his flagship and watched the blue planet grow larger on his screens, and he felt the familiar satisfaction of a predator approaching prey. His communications officer opened a channel to every broadcast frequency on Earth, and the Admiral's message went out to 8 billion humans at once. People of Earth, you have been assessed and classified as a Tier 7 civilization under the laws of the hegemony of aligned worlds, and you are hereby ordered to surrender unconditionally, disarm all military forces, and prepare for genetic registration so that your population may be sorted into appropriate labor categories, and resistance will result in immediate planetary cleansing, and you have 6 of your hours to comply. Kethvaros closed the channel and turned to his tactical officer with a thin smile. Begin preparing the landing forces. They will need time to realize they have no choice. But once the initial shock passes, they will kneel as all the others have knelt. He was wrong. In Washington and Moscow and Beijing and London and 100 other capitals across the world, leaders who had spent decades as rivals looked at each other through screens and saw something new in each other's eyes, not fear recognition. They were all human, and something had finally come along that was worse than anything they could do to each other. The American president spoke first. I am authorizing the immediate sharing of all nuclear launch codes and targeting data with every nation on this call. The Russian premier nodded. Our submarines are moving to launch positions. We will coordinate with your carrier groups. The Chinese General Secretary leaned forward. Our satellite networks are at your disposal. All of them. Within 3 hours, every nuclear power on Earth had moved their arsenals to launch-ready status. And for the first time in human history, all those weapons pointed in the same direction. Old enemies became allies. Rivals became brothers. A species that had spent a century threatening to destroy itself discovered that it would rather die together than kneel to something from beyond the stars. Kethvaros received reports of the military movements and dismissed them as panic. as the futile scrambling of primitives who did not understand what they were facing. His tactical officer was less certain. "Admiral, their coordination is faster than our models predicted. They should be fighting each other for survival, not unifying. They are animals cornered by a predator." Kethvaros replied, "Panic creates the illusion of cooperation, but it will not last. Prepare the first dropship. We will secure the region called North America as our initial foothold." The dropship descended through Earth's atmosphere carrying 3,000 hegemony ground troops. Warriors who had conquered dozens of worlds, veterans who had never known defeat. They expected to land unopposed because no Tier 7 civilization had ever attempted to resist the initial landing. They did not know that 17 nations had scrambled every available aircraft. They did not know that pilots from countries that had been enemies for generations were now flying in formation together. They did not know that humans had spent 100 years perfecting the art of killing. Things that flew. The dropship broke through the clouds over the Pacific Ocean, and alarms began screaming across every console. Missiles were coming from every direction. The dropship's point defense systems activated and began swatting the primitive. Weapons from the sky, but there were so many of them. Wave after wave after wave. And behind the missiles came the aircraft. American F-35s flew beside Russian Su-57s, flew beside Chinese J-20s, flew beside jets from a dozen other nations, all of them pouring fire into the massive alien vessel. The hegemony soldiers inside the dropship felt the impacts and heard the groaning of stressed metal and looked at each other with something they had never experienced before. Doubt on the bridge of his flagship, Kethvaros watched in disbelief as his dropship took damage from weapons that should not have been able to scratch its hull. How is this possible? Their technology is primitive. His tactical officer pulled up the sensor data. They are not trying to overpower our shields. They are targeting the same points over and over. They are learning in real time where our weak spots are, Admiral. They are adapting faster than any species we have encountered. The dropship's shields failed over the Pacific, and still the human pilots came. And when their missiles ran out, they switched to guns. And when their guns ran empty, 3 pilots flew their aircraft directly into the dropship's engines. They did not try to eject. They did not try to save themselves. They aimed their planes at the alien ship, and they accelerated, and they died with their hands on the controls and smiles on their faces. The dropship fell burning into the ocean, and 3,000 hegemony warriors drowned in the waters of a world they had been told would surrender without a fight. Kethvaros stood frozen on his bridge as the reports came in. The dropship was gone. All hands lost, destroyed by primitives and flying machines that should have been no threat at all. His second-in-command pulled up the assessment data and searched through it frantically. "Admiral, there must be an error in the report. These are not Tier 7 behaviors. No species at that level would sacrifice themselves this way. The report is accurate," Kethvaros said quietly, and his voice had changed. The contempt was gone. "Their technology is exactly as primitive as we assessed. Then how do we classify a species willing to die just to prove they can hurt us?" Kethvaros did not answer for a long moment. He watched the burning wreckage of his dropship sink beneath the waves of the Pacific, and he thought about the pilots who had aimed their aircraft at certain death without hesitation. He thought about a species that had spent its entire existence fighting and dying, and refusing to stop. "You do not classify them?" He finally said, "You have already lost." The first battle of Earth had lasted less than 2 hours. The hegemony had suffered its first defeat against a Tier 7 civilization in 12,000 years. And across the planet, 8 billion humans looked up at the sky and knew that they had done something impossible. They had hurt the enemy. They had proven that the invaders could bleed. And if you could make something bleed, then you could make it die. The second dropship launched from the hegemony fleet, and humanity rose to meet it. This was going to be a long war, and humanity was just getting started. Admiral Kethvaros had protocols for this situation. even if he had never expected to use them. When a species resisted the hegemony, you did not waste time trying to conquer them piece by piece. You made an example of them. You burned their cities and poisoned their atmosphere and turned their world into a grave that would warn other species for 1,000 years. He ordered his fleet into bombardment formation and watched his ships move into position above the planet that had embarrassed him. His weapons officer prepared the targeting solutions. Admiral, if we begin with their largest population centers, we can eliminate 3 billion of them in the first wave. The survivors will have no choice but to surrender. Target their capitals first, Kethvaros commanded. Show them that their leaders cannot protect them. But before he could give the order to fire, his sensor officer screamed an alarm that changed everything. Admiral, we have multiple nuclear launches from the planet's surface. 14 warheads approaching our fleet. Kethvaros almost laughed. Their primitive weapons cannot penetrate our shields. Let them waste their ammunition. Sir, the warheads are not targeting our ships. The Admiral froze. Then what are they targeting? The sensor officer looked up with confusion and fear mixed in his eyes. Each other, Admiral. They are targeting each other. 14 thermonuclear warheads detonated in a precise pattern between the hegemony fleet and the planet. Not aimed at the ships, but positioned to create a massive electromagnetic pulse that washed across every vessel in the formation. For 18 seconds, every sensor on every ship went blind. Kethvaros gripped his command chair as his screens flickered and died, and in that darkness he felt something he had not experienced in 200 years of warfare terror, because he understood in that moment what the humans were doing. They had sacrificed 14 of their most powerful weapons not to destroy his fleet, but to create an opening, a window of blindness that his ships could not see through. And in those 18 seconds, humanity launched everything. When the sensors came back online, the tactical display was chaos. Missiles were rising from every continent on Earth, thousands of them, more than the hegemony had estimated the humans possessed. And they were not all aimed at the fleet. Some were heading toward empty space. Kethvaros traced their trajectories, and his blood went cold. They have calculated our translation point, he whispered. His tactical officer confirmed. 3 of their missiles are heading directly toward the coordinates where our fleet entered this system. They are carrying their largest nuclear warheads combined with radioactive material. Admiral, if those weapons detonated our translation point, they cannot destroy it, Kethvaros said, but his voice lacked conviction. No, sir. But they can contaminate it. They can make it dangerous to use. Any ship that translates through that point will be exposed to massive radiation. It will not kill the crews immediately, but it will make them sick. It will reduce their effectiveness. It will. He did not need to finish. Kethvaros understood the humans were not trying to win this battle. They were trying to make the war expensive. They were telling the hegemony that every victory would cost them, that every fleet sent to Earth would pay a price in ships and soldiers and time, that even if they succeeded in destroying humanity, they would bleed for it. The missiles reached the fleet and point defense systems activated, but there were so many more than there should have been. And 11 ships exploded in the darkness of space. 11 ships. Lost to a Tier 7 civilization. The crew casualties would number in the tens of thousands. Kethvaros gave the order to retreat to safe distance and felt shame burn in his chest as his fleet pulled back from a planet that should have been conquered in a single day. His communications officer received a transmission from the planet surface, and the Admiral almost did not want to hear it, but he nodded for it to be played. A human voice spoken heavily, accented Galactic Standard. You can destroy us, we know this, but we will make you remember it. We will make you bleed for every inch of our world. And the next species you try to conquer will know that you can be hurt. They will know that the mighty hegemony is not invincible. And they will find their courage because of us. So come if you will, burn our cities, kill our children, turn our planet to ash. We are not afraid. We have never been afraid. And even our ghosts will haunt you. The transmission ended. Kethvaros stood in silence on his bridge, and around him his officers waited for orders, but he had none to give. He had conquered 63 worlds in his career, and not one of them had ever spoken to him like that. Not one of them had ever chosen to make their extinction meaningful. Instead of simply trying to prevent it, the humans understood that they could not win, but they had found a way to make losing matter. His V's second in command stepped forward. Admiral, we must request reinforcements. We do not have the forces to both conquer the planet and absorb these kinds of losses. Kethvaros nodded slowly. Send the request. Tell command that we have encountered an anomaly. Tell them the assessment was incomplete. Tell them. He paused and looked at the blue planet on his screens. That small, fragile world that had just taught him something he had never learned in 200 years of warfare. Tell them that these humans do not fight to win. They fight to cost us, and I do not know how to defeat an enemy that has already accepted death. The message went out and across the galaxy. The Gemini High Command read it with disbelief. A pacification fleet requesting reinforcements against a Tier 7 world. It was unprecedented. It was impossible, and yet the casualty reports did not lie. Something had gone terribly wrong at Earth, and for the first time in 12,000 years the hegemony began to wonder if they had finally found something they could not conquer. The second fleet arrived 9 months after the first battle, and it was 30 times larger than anything Earth had faced before. 200 capital ships, carrying millions of soldiers, crewed by species that had been perfecting warfare since before humans learned to use fire, armed with weapons that could crack continents and boil oceans. Supreme Admiral HFY commanded this fleet, and she had conquered 47 worlds in her long career, and she had never failed, and she did not intend to fail. Now she looked at the reports from Kethvaros and felt contempt for his weakness, felt shame that a hegemony admiral had been humiliated by primitives. And she swore that she would not make the same mistakes. We will not give them time to prepare, she told her officers. We will not broadcast demands or wait for surrender. We will simply begin the cleansing and let the survivors beg for mercy. Her fleet translated into Earth's orbital space, and HFY expected to find a broken world. A species exhausted by 9 months of waiting for death. A civilization ready to kneel. She found something else entirely Earth had changed. Every government on the planet had set aside every conflict and every resource and every scientist for a single purpose. They had recovered pieces of the crashed dropship from the Pacific Ocean, and they had studied alien technology with desperate intensity, and they had combined it with their own innovations in ways that made no logical sense. Human engineers had looked at hegemony shield technology and said, what if we did this instead and created something new human? Scientists had examined alien weapons and said, we can make this cheaper and dirtier and nastier. And they had human soldiers had trained for 9 months knowing that death was coming, and they had not despaired. They had prepared. They had built bunkers and weapons caches and guerrilla networks that would keep fighting long after the cities burned. But most importantly, humanity had prepared a message. When HFY's fleet arrived, they found it broadcasting on every frequency, in every hegemony language, repeating endlessly across the void of space. The message included footage from the first battle, pilots flying their aircraft into alien engines, soldiers holding positions until they were overrun, and then detonating themselves to take enemies with them. Civilians building weapons in their homes with nothing but determination and rage. And over this footage, a human voice spoke words that would echo across the galaxy for centuries. "We know we cannot defeat you. We know you can burn our world to ash and scatter our bones across the void. We have done the mathematics, and we understand that your power is beyond anything we can match. But we have made a decision. Every ship you send will cost you. Every soldier you land will cost you. Every victory you claim will cost you. We have calculated our own extinction, and we have accepted it. Not because we want to die, but because we understand that our deaths can mean something. Somewhere out there are other species you have conquered, other worlds you have crushed, other civilizations that knelt because they thought they had no choice, and we want them to see this. We want them to watch what happens when a species decides that freedom is worth any price. We want them to look at Earth's grave and find hope. So come then, if you will. Bring your fleets and your armies and your weapons of annihilation. We are not afraid. We have never been afraid. And we will teach your children and your children's children what it means to fight something that has nothing left to lose. This is humanity's answer to your ultimatum. This is our response to your demands for surrender. We refuse, now and forever. We refuse." The message ended and began again and across. Yethval's fleet officers looked at each other with uncertainty in their eyes. This was not how conquered species behaved. This was not what the reports had prepared them for. Yethval herself stood frozen on her bridge as the message played again, and she thought about the 47 worlds she had conquered, and she tried to remember if any of them had ever spoken to her with such defiance. They had not. They had begged and pleaded and bargained and surrendered because they believed that survival was better than extinction. The humans did not believe that. The humans believed that some things were worth dying for, and that freedom was one of them, and that even if they could not win, they could make their defeat so costly that it would light a fire. Across the galaxy, Yethval's tactical officer approached. "Supreme Admiral, our communications are being monitored. The human message is being relayed beyond this system. It is spreading to other worlds, conquered worlds. Our own subjects are hearing this. Can we block it?" "No, Supreme Admiral. They have found ways to bounce their signals through our own relay network. Every world in the hegemony will hear this within days." Yethval understood what that meant. If she destroyed Earth, now it would prove that the humans were right. It would prove that the hegemony could be hurt and that defiance had meaning. But if she did not destroy Earth, then the humans would keep broadcasting and keep inspiring and keep showing the galaxy that there was another way. She had conquered 47 worlds, and she had never hesitated before a battle. She hesitated now because for the first time in her career she faced an enemy that had already won simply by refusing to lose. The humans could not defeat her fleet, but they had found a way to make their defeat into a victory. And Supreme Admiral Yethval, conqueror of 47 worlds, veteran of 100 campaigns, looked at the small blue planet on her screens and did not know what to do. Her fleet held position days past, and across the galaxy, conquered species heard humanity's message and began to whisper to each other in the darkness. If the humans could make them bleed, maybe they could too. The High Council of the Hegemony had not convened in 3 centuries because there had been no need. No crisis that could not be handled by standard protocols. No threat that required the attention of all 12 ruling species. But the Earth situation demanded their presence. They gathered in the great chamber on the throne world, and the air was thick with tension and accusation as representatives of the 12 founding species argued about what to do with one small blue planet that had thrown the entire hegemony into chaos. The military faction spoke first. We must destroy them completely. Burn their world to slag. Leave nothing alive. Make such an example that no species will ever consider resistance again. The economic faction responded. At what cost? We have already lost 11 ships and thousands of soldiers against a Tier 7 civilization. The Second Fleet has been holding position for 3 weeks, and unrest is spreading on 40 conquered worlds. Every day we delay, the situation grows worse. The diplomatic faction, long ignored and marginalized, saw an opportunity. Perhaps there is another way. Perhaps we should consider that this species cannot be conquered by force. The military representative slammed his clawed hand against the table. Every species can be conquered by force. This is the foundation of everything we have built. And yet these humans remain unconquered. The chamber fell silent. The High Counselor, oldest and wisest of them all, raised one withered hand. We will hear from Assessor Prime Velethkan. He made the original evaluation. Let him explain where his calculations went wrong. Velethkan stepped forward, and he looked older than he had 9 months ago. The weight of his era visible in every line of his face. I have spent these months in orbit around Earth studying the humans, trying to understand my mistake. And I believe I finally comprehend what went wrong. He activated a display showing his original assessment data. These numbers are all accurate. Their technology is primitive. Their civilization is fragmented. Their military is limited. By every metric we use, they should have surrendered immediately. Then, why did they not surrender? The High Counselor asked. Velethkan took a deep breath. Because we measure the wrong things. Explain. We measure power and resources. In ships, in technology, in population, we count what a species has, and we calculate whether they can resist us. And if the answer is no, we expect them to recognize this and submit. This has worked for 12,000 years because most species are rational. They calculate their odds and accept the inevitable. He paused. Humans are not rational. Or rather, they have a different kind of rationality. They do not calculate whether they can win. They calculate whether the fight is worth having. And they have decided that freedom is worth any price. Even extinction. The military representative scoffed. Then we give them extinction. Problem solved. No, Velethkan said quietly. Problem made worse. He changed the display to show reports from across the hegemony. 47 worlds have reported increased resistance activity since the human broadcasts began. 12 worlds have had open uprisings. Our garrison forces are stretched thin trying to maintain order. And every day the humans survive, this grows worse. We did not just threaten Earth. We threatened every conquered species in our empire. And the humans called our bluff. They showed everyone that we can be hurt. That our ships can be destroyed, that our soldiers can be killed. And now every slave species in the hegemony is wondering if they could do the same. The High Counselor leaned forward. What do you recommend? Velethkan's answer would reshape galactic politics for millennia. We cannot conquer them. I know this is difficult to accept, but the mathematics are clear. If we destroy Earth, we prove that resistance has meaning, and we inspire 100 rebellions. If we leave them alone, we prove the same thing. There is no path to victory here. There is always a path to victory. The military representative growled. Not against an enemy that has already accepted death, Velethkan replied. Not against a species that measures victory differently than we do. We measure victory in territory controlled and resources gained and enemies destroyed. They measure victory in whether they remain standing, whether they refuse to kneel, whether their children will remember them as free beings or slaves. By their measure, they have already won simply by not surrendering. The chamber erupted in argument, but the High Counselor raised his hand for silence, and when he spoke, his voice was heavy with the weight of 12 1,000 years of history. What would you have us do, Assessor Prime? Withdraw, Velith Khan said simply. Pull back our fleet, leave Earth alone. Classify them as something new, something we have never encountered before. And what classification would that be? Velith Khan looked at the display showing Earth. That small blue world that had humiliated the greatest empire in galactic history. Sovereign by right of demonstrated cost. A species too expensive to conquer, not because they are powerful, but because they are willing to pay any price to remain free. The debate lasted for 3 more days, but in the end, the High Council had no better option. Supreme Admiral Yethval received the order to withdraw, and she obeyed it with shame burning in her heart, but also with something else. Something she had not expected: respect. The human broadcasts had reached her crew, and she had seen her soldiers watching them, had seen something change in their eyes, had heard them whispering to each other about a species that would rather die than kneel on the last day before the withdrawal. She did something unprecedented. She opened a channel to Earth, and she spoke directly to the humans, who had defeated her without winning a single battle. You have taught us something, she said. Something we had forgotten in 12,000 years of conquest. You have reminded us that some victories are too costly to pursue, and some defeats are more glorious than any victory. We will not return, but we will remember. The fleet translated out of Earth's system, and humanity watched them go, and across the planet 8 billion humans looked up at the sky and wept and laughed and held each other. They had won, not through superior technology or greater numbers or smarter tactics. They had won because they refused to lose. In the years that followed, humanity would reach out to other species, would help them find their own courage, would show them that the hegemony was not invincible, and across the galaxy beings who had knelt for thousands of years began to stand. It started with whispers. The humans made them bleed. It grew into a roar. So can we. The hegemony would never be the same, and it all began because one assessor measured Earth's power and got it wrong. He measured what they had. He should have measured what they were willing to become.